Thank you. My name's Suzannah Smart, obviously, and I am very excited to be here today to talk with you all about mindful eating. It is one of my favourite topics, so I will do my best not to go off on tangents and try and get you done in time for morning tea. But so just firstly, very briefly, to introduce myself. How does this thing work? Help? Big green button. Got it. Thank you. All right, good start. As mentioned, I'm a dietitian. I've been lucky enough to be a dietitian for the past 8 years, working mostly in private practice, but also in some hospitals in Australia and also the UK. I now have my business based up in the Barossa Valley, where we have several clinics and also do a lot of work with community groups doing nutrition projects. One of my favourite things to work on with clients is non-dieting approaches to improving their nutrition and their health, their relationship with food, and learning to enjoy a way of healthy eating that works for them. And mindful eating is one of my favourite, most enjoyable and rewarding parts of that. So let's get started. So firstly, just before we delve into more of the specifics of mindful eating, let's just look at the broader concept of mindfulness. So mindfulness essentially is just being present in the moment. Sounds pretty simple, right? But surprisingly can be somewhat difficult to achieve. We're all used to trying to do 10 million things all at once. We've always got something else on our minds. We're thinking about either the next thing we were doing or the last thing we were doing, or if not, we're distracted by either our phones or the TV or whatever else is going on. So it can be quite difficult to actually drag ourselves right back into the moment and focus on what is going on in the present. But the more you practice it, the easier it can become. And the benefits of that have been shown. There's a lot of research happening in this area, showing that it can be helpful for our overall well-being, as well as particularly mental health conditions, things like stress and anxiety and depression, which we'll go over very briefly soon. But some of the main concepts of it are just being present, having a bit of a purpose of what you're doing, observing what's going on, and importantly as well, doing that in a non-judgmental way. So if we start bringing that into our eating, we might be asking the questions of what are we eating, why are we eating it, where, how, and when are we eating it. So just looking at all of those questions around what we're doing and actually thinking about what we're doing a little bit. Now, starting to get used to the idea of mindful eating, I think the easiest way to get into that is actually thinking about what it's not. So the opposite of mindful eating is mindless eating. Now, I'm sure many of us are quite practiced at this one. Let me give you a quick example that I'm sure many of us can relate to. You're sitting there on the couch, it's after dinner, you're tired, you're watching TV, you've got a packet of something delicious on your lap, whether that's chocolate, chips, whatever floats your boat. And you're eating it, it's yummy, but all of a sudden you look down and the packet's empty. And you go, where on earth did that just go? So that is, I was talking to someone and they termed this a snackcident. Apparently that's a common term. Basically when you just accidentally eat something. So it could be that you didn't mean to eat the thing at all, or you just didn't quite mean to finish the whole packet. I'm sure I'm seeing a lot of nods around the room, so I think there's a few people that might relate to that one. So why might this not be something that's helpful for us, or why might it be something that we want to move away from? So some of the downfalls of mindless eating is one, obviously in that example, it's very easy to accidentally overeat more than you perhaps intended. Along with that, we can often feel some negative consequences of that quite immediately, whether that's physical, just in how your stomach feels. It might get a little bit uncomfortable, sort of that distension, real discomfort in your stomach. It might also leave you feeling sluggish or tired or with raised blood sugar levels, or you may also experience those negative emotions that a lot of us have, because there's a lot of emotions tied in with food, and we judge ourselves a lot on what we eat as well. So if we've done something that perhaps we feel like we shouldn't have, then we often feel guilty. Now, I won't go off into a tangent about that because I can talk about that on its own for half an hour, but moral of the story is guilt doesn't help us eat better. Usually it actually has the opposite effect. So again, if you've ever had the situation where you've perhaps eaten, I don't know, half a block of chocolate, and you start beating yourself up about it, and you go, oh, why did I do that? And oh, well, look, I've failed now, and I'm such an idiot, and I may as well just finish the whole block so it's gone. Again, lots of nods. So that's a common one, and you can see how that negative sort of association actually has a bit of a backfiring effect. Instead of helping us to stop eating, it actually quite often makes us eat even more. So just something to be aware of, but like I said, I could talk about that for hours. I talked about the discomfort, the sugar, the enjoyment. Now again, I'll come back to that, but when we're mindlessly eating, we're not really noticing it, and therefore quite often we don't enjoy it as much as we really could. But I will come back to that, and same with the wasting of food. So I will branch out on that a little bit more when we flick over to the positives. But so why might we then want to eat mindfully? I'm sure you're starting to get a bit of an idea, because we obviously don't want to be doing all of those, or experiencing all of those negative aspects that happen with the mindless eating. So with mindful eating, just briefly back to mindfulness in general. In the research, it has been shown to improve all sorts of things. So just overall well-being, as I mentioned, some of those mental health conditions, even eating disorders, and potentially even weight loss. So kind of surprising in some ways, but once you start getting into it, it's actually not all that surprising. So you'll see why. So again, just highlighting those negatives of the mindless eating. When we start practicing mindful eating, we start seeing the exact opposite of all of those things. So instead of overeating, one of the big aspects or real practical tools that we are going to go through today is we start to use or learn how to use hunger and fullness as our main guiding tools. So really learning how to listen into our body's signals, what it's trying to tell us, and learning what hunger feels like when that comes along, how hungry you are, using that as your guide as to when and how much to eat. And also on the flip side of that, learning about our individual fullness levels and learning to check in. So again, rather than being distracted by the TV, you can start to listen in to what your body's trying to tell you. And that works as a really wonderful way for basically managing our portion sizes in a way, but it just helps us naturally start to learn how to finish eating when we feel physically comfortable. And so that starts to have the opposite effect to the overeating, is that you just naturally start to stop when you're full. And that comes along quite easily with just practicing this skill. As a consequence of that, you end up feeling more comfortable after eating much more often, which one just feels great, but also helps your health as well. Definitely that less judgment, which I mentioned as well, because when you start to, you really do have to practice taking the judgment out of it, but when you practice that alongside the mindful eating, removing the judgment helps you see clearer about just what's going on in that moment. Instead of dragging in all of those negative associations, you start to just see, okay, well, how do I feel when I do this? Okay, it doesn't feel that great. I might do it differently next time. So you end up having a much more effective action from being able to reflect on that situation. A perfect example was one of my clients this week had started preparing her lunches. She made some beautiful rice paper rolls, and she ate 4 of them one day, and after that she realised that it was actually too much for her. She was slightly uncomfortable afterwards. Instead of beating herself up and going, oh, this is stupid, I've failed, and I may as well give up on the whole thing, she simply said to me, yeah, so I took 3 the next day and it was great. So yeah, you can just much more clearly reflect on what's going on and change your action accordingly. More enjoyment and noticing it more. So when you remove the distractions, you slow down, you start chewing your food, you start tasting your food, looking at your food perhaps, smelling it, all of those things, which again we are going to go through a practical exercise. I forgot to mention, but thankfully I don't think anyone is doing it. Nobody eat the almonds until I say so. Thank you. Where was I going? When you start tasting your food and noticing it, you get so much more enjoyment out of food. I get people tell me all the time that they love eating and they just can't stop eating. But when we look into it, they're not really tasting their food. And this happens a lot when you're, again, feeling guilty about your food. If you're hiding in the cupboard and scoffing it all down because you don't want anyone to see you and you're eating it really quickly, or you're eating it in the car, or anything like that. You're just taking it in so fast that you don't even taste it. And then as a consequence of that, you still feel unsatisfied at the end of it. You haven't got that enjoyment out of it. You haven't really even felt like you've eaten it. So then you end up wanting to go back and get more. Same thing with portions of just, say, dinner. If you haven't really noticed it and it was a delicious food, you end up wanting to go back and get seconds just so that you can taste it again. Which, it just doesn't, I guess, when you look at it logically, make all that much sense. So again, a natural side effect of this is that when you slow down and taste it, you end up feeling more satisfied and you actually eat less with more enjoyment of that food. We'll go through the practical side. And the waste. So again, an interesting one. A lot of people tell me that they have to eat everything on their plate because they were taught not to waste food. Again, lots of nods and chuckles there, so I'm sure that's a common one. And to be honest, even I had a little bit of trouble. I had to unlearn some of those habits myself. But when we are just eating because it's on our plate, again, we might not even be enjoying those last few mouthfuls all that much. We might be eating past that point of comfort. And when you're overeating more than you really needed or even possibly wanted, it is a waste of food, when perhaps you may have been able to spend less money buying a smaller portion in the first place, or you could save part of that portion for the next meal and then get to eat it twice, which again saves you money and you get to enjoy it a second time. So just flipping your way of thinking about some of those, questioning some of your assumptions and some of your old habitual eating patterns, and just, again, bringing that awareness into what you're doing and learning different ways of it. As you can see, lots of benefits. Now, this one was interesting. There was actually a study that looked into mindful eating as a approach for diabetes management. So they had 2 groups of people with diabetes. One of them was just given a more traditional diabetes management approach, and the other group was given a mindful eating approach. So both of those groups had really similar improvements. So they both improved in their diabetes management, but what was interesting about it was that in both groups they had similar improvements in their nutrition, particularly in the total calories consumed and also the glycemic load. They also had very similar improvements in their weight and blood sugar management as well. So it was only a small study and just one study, but it certainly does show that there is the potential for this to be included as a very helpful approach to diabetes management, which is, I'm sure, why I was asked to be coming in here today and talking about it. So just quickly looking at why that might work, why this might be a great approach for diabetes. And look, I mean, it makes sense with all of those benefits that we were talking about. I'm sure I don't really need to explain it out to you, but obviously that increased awareness and noticing when you're full, and that tendency to have less overeating. But also, if you bring that awareness one step further into what happens in your own body with your blood sugar levels. So extending that awareness out to what happens, in the next couple of hours after you've eaten, and noticing how your blood sugar level response is. That can be a great part of the mindfulness as well, more specific to diabetes. I've spoken about that one. And so less habitual eating. More than half of what we eat is purely out of habit. Now what that means is we're on autopilot. Kind of like driving a car. Ever had that experience where you're driving a car and you get to the destination and you don't even know how you got there? So your hands are doing the gears without you thinking about it. You know your route and you know where you're going subconsciously, so your brain isn't really even involved. That happens a lot with eating. So when it's that habitual eating, our brain, our conscious brain, the side that makes decisions and does the logical thinking, isn't even involved. It's completely checked out, and our automatic side takes over. So that's what happens in habitual eating, which, like I said, is over half of what we put in our mouth. So mindfulness helps to drag us out of autopilot and into more of that conscious thought, which just helps us to really make more purposeful food choices, and especially if one of our motivations is our health, that helps us a lot to make more healthy food choices. This is one of my favourite ones. So with mindful eating and this non-dieting approach, we start to move away from a reliance on willpower and more into just wanting to do things naturally because it feels good. Now, the reason that's helpful is because willpower is not a great thing to be relying on. We as humans, we have a little bit of willpower, and depending on our motivation levels in the day or in the minute or the week, that can fluctuate a lot. It often decreases down the day. So by the time evening comes and you're tired and you're stressed from the day and motivation goes down and willpower just gets really, really weak. So moving into this mindful approach, this non-judgmental approach. Let me give you an example. So just this week, actually, I had a young girl who we've been doing this approach with. She had only been doing it for a couple of weeks, but she had been improving her eating and choosing a lot more nourishing, nutritious foods, eating more regularly. And she just off her own bat said to me, and on the weekend we had pizza. And I felt awful afterwards. I don't think I want to eat that again. So that's the type of situation that I hear clients coming back and telling me every single day, every single week, if not sort of every day, there'd be a client who's had that situation happen. Last week it was fish and chips. He hadn't had fish and chips in forever, and he was away, he was at the beach, and he thought, I'm just going to treat myself. I'm going to really enjoy this fish and chips. So he made this conscious, mindful decision that he was going to do that. And he gets his fish and chips and he starts eating it and he goes, it's so greasy and salty, and he got a few mouthfuls in and he just pushed it away and didn't want it. He left the rest of it there. Even though he'd made that decision, he'd been really looking forward to it. Once he started eating it mindfully and really noticing it, he noticed how awful it was. So just be cautious, that can be a side effect, can be a very helpful side effect, obviously, in terms of our health. But sometimes when you practice this mindful eating, things don't actually taste as great as you thought they did. And or if they do, you start to learn how much of a quantity of that you can enjoy while still also feeling great and, also managing your blood sugar levels at the same time. So Another flip side of this is that, again, very naturally, when we start to bring this awareness in, we find that emotional eating and comfort eating actually decreases, again, with no effort. Just because you start to check in with yourself about what's going on, it allows that awareness for we'll talk about how to check in with how you're hungry, but if you check in and you're not hungry, it then allows you to step back and go, okay, well, why am I here in the kitchen staring at the cupboard? Is there maybe something else going on? And with time and practice and for a lot of people support alongside that as well, they're then able to develop more helpful skills that help them manage their emotions rather than food. Because food's great for all of about 10 seconds until the food's gone, and then you kind of need more food to keep filling the void or distract yourself, and then you feel guilty and the whole story goes. But it just naturally starts to have that effect. And naturally also, like I said, veering towards healthier foods just purely because it feels better rather than it's something that you should be doing. So let's now actually get into it. So let's have a really quick look at how to actually practice some of these aspects of mindful eating. So you'll just see here I've got before, during and after. So it can be encompassing what's going on, not just during the eating but before and after as well. So quickly just before, first great question to just keep it simple to ask is, am I actually hungry? So obviously if it's yes, sometimes it's a little bit hard to figure out, but this can be a great way to really differentiate what's going on there, because often it's just not a clear black and white answer to that question. But so I'll just run you through, I've got what's called a hunger scale here. There are some printouts on your tables in front of you that you can use as reference there as well, and which you can take home, maybe stick on your fridge. So firstly, looking at hunger, just checking in with, okay, how hungry am I? Number one there, we've got absolutely starving. So this is where you cannot cope with anything until you've got some food in your belly, where perhaps you may not be able to think straight, you may be some people get angry. I have to admit, I'm in the hangry group, as my husband can attest to. When I get really hungry, not a nice person to be around, and my brain just stops functioning. But then we've got the different levels of that. So just where you might feel weak, you might be a little bit shaky, your blood sugar levels might be dropping a little bit. Number 3 is just, basically hungry. I would like to eat now. Whereas number 4 is more of just a peckish, where you may feel like eating something little, but perhaps if dinner's in half an hour, you might be able to easily wait so that you don't ruin your appetite for dinner. And then, now number 5 is an interesting one, and that's not something that we really discuss, I think, a lot in life, but 5 is just neutral. So not hungry, not full. There's no signals coming from your body. So actually the most comfortable place to be, and usually the most energising place to be as well, because your body's happy, it's not looking for anything. And then we've got the different levels of fullness as well. So going through from just feeling satisfied, perhaps comfortably full, where you might just be able to feel the food in your stomach, but there's no pressure there. Moving up through to the stages of really feeling uncomfortable, where perhaps there might be pressure, it might be actually almost quite painful, right up to 10, which I relate to after Christmas lunch, where everyone just needs to go into a food coma and lie on the couch. We're all groaning, holding our stomachs, and no one can do anything until we've slept it off. Again, not a great place to be. So you can see at number 1 and number 10, that's the extreme ends of the scale. That's your body going, hey, you missed the earlier signals and you let me get too far. Can you please not do that again anytime soon? A little bit almost like a hangover. Your body's just going, nah, not great, please don't. But then obviously there's those more common ones that we might do are just those, just that little bit uncomfortable, but don't feel great either. So you can see in that middle zone is the most comfortable place to be. That's where you really want to be aiming for. That's what you want to be listening for, those cues. And it does help you manage your health quite well as well. But yeah, really in that sort of 4 to 6 is a nice place to be. But you do want to be hungry before meals as well. Partly just because food tastes better. And your body's asking for it. So now, what happens if you check in and you ask yourself, okay, am I hungry? And you see that you're either level 5 or above. So at that point, we might want to delve a little bit deeper. If you're someone who has perhaps a little bit of emotional eating, that could be the questions to ask. Sometimes it can just be very simple that bringing that awareness in goes, oh, okay, I'm actually just doing this out of habit and I'm not actually hungry yet and I might just want to wait a little bit. Whereas sometimes you might need a little bit more support with that, depending on how deep-seated it is or how complicated it is. I mentioned food on the... just broadly, obviously, there's a lot of reasons why we eat other than hunger. So food is a social thing for us. We have a lot of associations with food. We use food for everything, right? And it's always everywhere. But it's very natural and very human that we don't just always eat when we're hungry. There's many other reasons, as you can see listed up there. Whether it's habit or just the time of day. If you're someone who eats dinner at 6 o'clock, regardless of whatever else is going on, that's a common one. Or if it's, that's when your lunch break is and you have to eat, you don't really have a choice. Or like we mentioned before, that distraction can make us eat. Or just because you don't want to offend someone if you're over at their house and they've offered you something and you can't say no. Again, an interesting one. Sometimes it's just people's perceptions that people think that others will be offended and when they actually practice it, they're not actually that offended. But anyway, point is plenty of other reasons why we might eat. So just checking in and noticing those. And then skipping to during when we're eating. This is just, I'll leave this to when we do the practical exercise. I think we might do that in a second. But did you know eating is the only thing that we do that involves all 5 of our senses? Just have a think about that one for a moment. There's nothing else. So if you're not engaging all 5 of your senses, you're missing out. Because food should be enjoyable and you should be getting all of those things. But yeah, again, those questions of what, when, why, etc. Removing the distractions, that is one of the easiest things you can do to make yourself be more mindful with your eating. So if this is one thing you take away from today, if you're someone who eats dinner in front of the TV, switch off the TV, eat at the table, you will automatically eat more mindfully and without even having to put any effort in and get a lot of these benefits. Very simple. Simple in theory, but habits are hard to change, but work on it. I promise it'll be worth it. And just slowing down and chewing rather than inhaling and checking in with how you feel while you're eating. And then after, obviously, how does your stomach feel afterwards? Is there a bit of a delayed effect? Did you feel okay in the moment, but then half an hour you felt really quite uncomfortable, or vice versa? Did you finish eating that lovely fresh salad that just had lettuce and then half an hour later you're starving? So just, whichever way it goes, checking in with how you felt afterwards. And obviously, if you're monitoring your blood sugar levels, that can be a very useful part of that as well. And remembering that non-judgmental reflection, just going, okay, if I wasn't happy with the outcome there, how might I be able to possibly do it differently next time I'm in that similar situation? So, now let's do it. Okay, so now you can eat your almonds, but with my guidance, okay? So you should all have your little thing of almonds there. There is some tape on it, so have a go at taking the tape off and opening it up, but don't eat them just yet. So once you've got it open, if anyone doesn't have one, yell out, and we've got someone walking around with a basket. So, all right. So we want to be practicing just using all 5 of our senses. I have to say I normally like to do this one with chocolate, but yeah, no. You can imagine using chocolate if you want to. This is actually a very useful practice for any food. So whether it's dinner or breakfast or a snack or whatever it is, whether it's healthy or maybe less nutritious. But I actually find that mindful eating is particularly helpful for a lot of people when you are eating a food purely for enjoyment rather than nutrition as well. Because like I said, if you're eating it for enjoyment, you should be enjoying it. And often you find that with this practice, you actually need less of the food to get that enjoyment. And I will explain a little bit about why. So first of all, we can use sight. So, I mean, you could spend 5 minutes doing this, you could spend half an hour doing this. I'll keep it to the shorter version for today, but just, very quickly looking at the almonds, maybe noticing things that you might not have ever noticed about them before. I did this with blueberries the other day with someone, and they sort of bit into a blueberry and went, oh, I never realised it's a different colour inside. So you might be surprised what you notice about your food when you start looking at it. So yeah, just noticing the little rough parts of it, the shape of it, the colour of it. I think these are dry roasted ones, so they're a little bit darker than perhaps your natural ones. Yeah, I don't know. We're just looking at what it looks like. And then smelling it. What does that smell like? How would you describe it? Other than, nutty. It smells like almonds. If you were trying to describe it to someone who'd never had an almond before, or never seen or tasted an almond before, how might you describe what that smells like? And smell is actually one of our strongest senses. Smell is what gives us, in terms of eating, smell is what gives us actually the sense of flavour. So it's before we put it in our mouth that we actually get that sense of flavour, if we're smelling it. Our tongue only gives us sweet, salty, savoury and sour, whereas it's our nose that gives us all of the delicacies of flavour and those aromas. That's why when you're sick, you can't taste your food properly, when you've got a blocked nose. So if you're not smelling your food, again, you're missing out. And sometimes they smell better than they taste as well. But okay, so picking one up, feeling it in with your fingers. Again, what does it feel like? The roughness, the smoothness of it. Perhaps biting into one, noticing the pressure and the crunch of it. I can hear that. So a lot of people, when you say that obviously your hearing is a sense that we use with eating. They go, oh, how's that work? Yep, there you go. It's that crunch aspect a lot of the time, or like with a carrot, you can really hear it. So noticing that, noticing as it moves around your mouth, what that feels like, how the texture changes as you grind it up into more of a paste. Perhaps how the aromas fill your mouth a little bit more. With chocolate, you can kind of really feel that texture change and sort of as it melts, the aromas get stronger. But whatever's going on for you there with the nuts. And that's all of them, isn't it? Oh, and what does it taste like, obviously? Other than just almonds. If you can try and really pinpoint as to, again, how would you describe that taste of almonds? Does it taste nice? Are you enjoying it? And then when you do eventually swallow it, is there a bit of an aftertaste? Can you still taste any of it? Is there still little bits of remnants in your mouth? But also noticing that once it's gone, it's kind of gone. So it's only when it's actually in your mouth that you're getting that real sense of flavour and enjoyment of it. And then noticing as well, as you take your second almond and perhaps your third almond and however many you like in this moment. What often happens with, what generally does happen if we notice it, is that the first mouthful is always the most amazing, because our brain's on overdrive because it's all brand new sensory input. So our brain tells us, it kind of notices a lot more when it's new. I don't know why, but anyway, it does. And so then with repeated sensory input, it starts to dull those signals down. So you notice that perhaps the second and third mouthful, there isn't kind of that oomph factor as much. Again, you really notice it with some of those stronger flavoured foods, but see if you can notice it with the almonds. That real taste and sensation of it starts to dull down. After about sort of the fourth mouthful or more, it's really dulled down significantly. So if you want to get really technical about it and you are eating a food purely for enjoyment, it's those first 4 mouthfuls that you're really looking for, and if you're actually tasting them, that's when you're going to get the most out of it. And then you may want to consider putting it away after those first 4 mouthfuls and then bringing it out again later when it's new again. So just something to consider there. But yeah, practice that when you're eating your next meal or perhaps your morning tea. What happens there? So that's a very brief introduction to mindful eating, but if, again, your one takeaway from that is to remove the distractions and try and engage all 5 of your senses next time you're eating. If you can practice that at least once a day, you will notice that it starts to become easier and a lot more natural, and you will start to get some of those benefits, all of those positive ones that we talked about. Again, very naturally, just purely from doing that practice. And again, I've put that note in about just remember to be the non-judgmental reflections of it to get the maximum benefit out of it. And it's just practice, practice, practice makes you better at it and makes you start to do it a lot more without thinking so much. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience.